Welcome on into another episode of Nate Hit the Foul Pole. I am your co-host, Matthew Pine, along with my other co-host, Zach Goodman. Zach, how are you?
I'm great, Matt. I'm excited to have Paul Hartzell on the show today. He used to pitch for the Orioles, and it's going to be a great interview.
Yep, and we will bring in Paul to the broadcast now. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hey, fellas, how are you?
Doing
great.
Good.
Paul, do you want to give the viewers a little bit of a background about yourself?
Well, I'll try to make it as brief as possible. With my first ever appearance at Memorial Stadium, I was 19 years old. I had just finished my sophomore year at Lehigh University, where I'd actually gone to play basketball. And I was seen by a scout for the Orioles, whose name was Jocko Collins, who signed and scouted a lot of great players in the 60s and 70s. And Jocko told me about a team in Baltimore that at the time was a transitional name with Johnny's Leones. It had been Leones for many years. It was a great amateur team. A lot of fellows from the ACC played on it. It was a 19 and under team, and I fit the age group category. And I was told to come and meet this man named Walter Yause at Memorial Stadium. And so, I drive down from Pennsylvania and meet this man in the parking lot, and he hands me an old flannel uniform. And I go into one of the restrooms in Memorial Stadium and put on this flannel uniform. I have no idea who I'm going to play for. I have no idea who I'm going to play against, but I know I'm going to pitch in Memorial Stadium. And so we go out on the field. There's no one, of course, there's no one in the stands. It's about maybe 11 o'clock in the morning. And the team that I'm going to pitch against are all a number of kids, young men who the Orioles are considering drafting. And the opposition was the team I was playing for, which was the Leones Johnny's team. And I proceed to pitch 6 innings. Again, I don't know anybody. I pitched 6 innings. I struck out either 11 or 12. And after the game was over, I went in the dugout, and the fellow who was the field manager for the team turns to Walter Yause and says, "Well, Walter, I think maybe he can help us." And so they said, "Okay, you'll be on the team." Well, I still hold the record for the most wins in the history of that team. 19 wins, no losses. We won a national championship. And that's really how I became a professional player. It's how I got drafted. It's how people saw me. That didn't happen all so much at Lehigh University. I was there to play basketball and become an engineer. I did become an engineer, but I stopped playing basketball after my sophomore year. So that led me into professional baseball. I only pitched about 46 innings of A ball before I went to the big leagues. And that was my rookie year in 1976. Dick Williams was my manager. I think in a little bit we'll talk about managers. And, Dick's the guy who gave a 22-year-old kid from Lehigh University the chance to pitch in the big leagues. And also, we'll cover the story later, but he also gave me a chance to pitch as a major leaguer in Memorial Stadium.
Yeah, it's a unique story, a great one, and it's definitely different back then how players used to, come to the majors a lot quicker than they do now. Obviously, a lot more player development, and the minors are a lot more broad than they were back then. But what was your experience like playing for the Orioles?
Well, I sort of got to the Orioles because I was so good against the Orioles. I had to go look up some stats, but I'll look down at my pad here. I pitched 69, almost 70 innings, 69 and 2/3 innings against the Orioles, and had an ERA of 2.71.
Wow.
So, and those were some great Orioles teams. That's starting in 76. I was the only pitcher in the American League to beat them twice in 1979. And so I become a free agent, and I have an opportunity, to sign with a couple of different clubs. And I chose the Orioles because I am born and raised in Pennsylvania and had a lot of friends there on the East Coast. And again, I had, first pitched there when I was 19 years old, made my, one of the very first games in the big leagues. And I just thought, well, this will be great. And, things didn't really work out for me. I hurt my back in Rochester. I still won 10 games in AAA, but that's because I knew how to pitch, not because I was really throwing the way I used to. So it was sort of one of those bittersweet summers. I wanted everything to be perfect, and life often doesn't work out the way you really think it might.
Definitely, and those were some great Oriole teams, like you mentioned before. Obviously, Jim Palmer, Eddie Murray, Rick Dempsey, a bunch of leaders in that team. What was it like playing with those guys?
Well, I remember it in a couple of ways, and we'll drag Earl into this in a little bit. But what I remembered about the team is, and I can go around that infield. Of course, Debs was the catcher, Eddie at first, Richie Dower at second, who's in the Oriole Hall of Fame, Belanger and Kiko Garcia at short, Doug DeSensei at third, outfield Lowenstein, in my mind, one of the greatest professional people I've ever played with, Al Bumbry in center, and Ken Singleton at right. That's an unbelievable baseball team.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had switch hitters, you had Ken and Eddie as switch hitters. But what I remember about Earl, and I always remember there was a meeting one time where, we're playing somebody, it's going to be a big series, and Earl wants to go over how we're going to pitch these guys. And we get to somebody, and what he says is he turns to Jim Palmer and says, now, I don't know what you were doing the last time we played against these guys, but I don't want you, and I'm cleaning this up a lot, as you would know. Earl is rather colorful. And he said, I don't know what you were doing the last time, but I don't want to see that slow curveball to so-and-so again. Well, if you're anybody else on the pitching staff and you hear the manager tell a guy who's undoubtedly going to go into the Hall of Fame, don't throw slow curveballs to so-and-so, I got news for you. You're not throwing a slow curveball to that guy. So it was an interesting way to watch Earl manage a team because, he could do the same for Eddie because Eddie was a switch hitter and guys were going to pitch him differently, whether they were obviously left-handed or right-handed. And Earl would use that kind of information, but he wouldn't necessarily key in on, John Lowenstein, for instance. He would just say, now Eddie's going to get this pitch. I want you to look for this pitch. And he would do the same thing with Rick Dempsey. In my observation, Dempsey was always on the field and he was always looking at the field. The great position of being the catcher, you can see everything. And he would rely a lot on those guys to position the players and, to tell them what the strategy was going to be. And then he let them implement the strategy. So it was just a great team and, had talent at every position. And, it was a lot of fun to be there. Of course, again, I had a lot more success against them than I did with them.
Yeah, I've heard Dan Duquette say before that Earl Weaver kind of embraced analytics before anybody else did. And, analytics are such a big part of the game now, but it sounds like Earl Weaver definitely did that kind of stuff. Going to your California Angels days, what was Nolan Ryan like to play with? Obviously, kind of a mentor to some of the younger players.
Well, he certainly was. Nolan is just, one of the most wonderful people, whether it's Nolan Ryan as a player or Nolan Ryan away from the field. He was someone that you watched, and the same thing really with Jim Palmer there with the Orioles. I mean, imagine it's pregame, we're out there in left field, we're running lines from left field to right field along the warning track, and the guy who finishes first every time is Jim Palmer. The guy who finishes first every time is Nolan Ryan. So the best players are working the hardest, and that motivates everybody else on the team, to perform at the highest possible level. And you have such admiration for them and what they do. But the thing that I always remember about Nolan is before they finished Anaheim Stadium's remodel, probably about, 12, 15 years ago for the Disney folks, you used to be able to take the left field bullpen gate and swing it all the way around so that you could stand behind the gate, which was, mesh, and you would be right behind the catcher who would be warming up Nolan. And so where you were is you were just in the same position as an umpire would be to call a game for Nolan Ryan. So we wouldn't do this before he was going to pitch a game, but we do it on the days he threw on the side. And all I can tell you, fellas, is I've never seen a human being throw a baseball that hard. And those were the days he was throwing on the side. So it was just remarkable. And I know there's guys today that throw hard. I've also seen a great big thing where they analyze, using modern technology on old types of records and video. Nolan comes out at the top, and some professor claims it's 107 miles an hour.
Yeah, he was amazing. There's a lot more guys like him now than I think there were back then. Of course, there are a lot of guys in the majors now that throw 100, but Nolan Ryan, certainly an incredible player. You touched on this before, but you played basketball at Lehigh University as well. What made you choose baseball specifically?
Well, sometimes in life, Matt, the choices get made for you. And I was recruited by a really nice man to Lehigh to play basketball. I was much more well-known in high school in Pennsylvania. I scored almost 1,300 points in my high school career and just a few shy of 1,000 rebounds. So I knew how to put it in the hole, and I knew how to go get it, And I wasn't fancy. And Lehigh was the right kind of school for me, which I'm just going to call small Division I. But I played there my freshman year. I think I was number 2 in scoring on the team, and then moved up to the varsity. But Lehigh had changed coaches. The man who had recruited me and was my coach, he left and was replaced by another coach. And the new coach, I'll just kindly say, didn't feel as though any of the old players were of his caliber. The problem with that was the people that he thought could change the caliber of the school, he couldn't keep them in the school, which, eligibility is a key component of being able to play athletics in college. And so that coach, my junior year and my senior year, I think he was 1-23 and 2-22, and then he got fired. But I stopped playing after my sophomore year and just concentrated on baseball. And that's the summer that, of course, I played for Johnny's. Then the following summer, as I was telling you guys earlier, I played for the team, the college all-star team out of Boulder, Colorado. So it was really one of those things. If I would have kept playing basketball, I would have played basketball during the summer and not baseball. And, the game would have been different. Probably never would have played professional baseball.
Looks like we got a small glitch here with Zach, but I'm sure he will be right back. But just moving on, Paul, starting pitchers throw fewer innings nowadays compared to the era in which you pitched. What do you think the reason is?
Here's kind of my general idea, and that is a lot of fellas in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, they could have thrown harder if you would have told them they only had to pitch 5 or 6 innings. So the idea that there's guys that throw harder today, I think you're kind of at the edge of human endurance when it comes down to that. But what's different today is, lots of clubs, and this happened the summer that I was there with the Orioles, and that is at one point in time, they went to a 9-man staff. And, you have, and I'll tell you a quick aside. Somebody asked Gene Mauch, who was, I played for 2 Hall of Fame managers plus Gene Mauch, who arguably, based on longevity in games won, could be in the Hall of Fame as well. And someone asked Gene one time, what record will never be broken? And Gene had an opinion that always was, people can break individual records. It is humanly possible to break individual records. But he answered the question absolutely immediately when he said, no one will ever have 4 20-game winners like the Baltimore Orioles did. It'll never happen again. And that looks more right today than ever. It will never happen again.
It's rare when you get one 20-game winner in an entire season.
To answer your question completely, the folks of my era and a little bit later, we were all taught and we were all built to pitch 9-inning games. And that was something that was important. It was important to the club. It was important to you as an individual. And that was, that's what you were expected to go out there and do. And I always thought an interesting thing, again, that I attribute to Earl was that Earl said, I'm pretty sure he said this or something close to it, that if the starting pitcher had a lead through the 7th inning, he was not going to let that starting pitcher get the loss. So his philosophy is, you get me 7, and I'm going to use the relief corps as needed so that you do not lose the game. And, and he had just had some wonderful guys. And, Steve Stone won the Cy Young Award the year I was there. Mm-hmm. And, Steve was I think by his own admission would consider himself a 500 pitcher. But for that one season, he was magical. And he was magical because of how Earl handled him, plus Tippy Martinez, Tim Stoddard, and Sammy Stewart, who, would regularly come in after the 7th inning and close out the game.
And as a sort of a piggyback off that, would you say that finesse pitchers are maybe more appreciated, these days?
Well, it's sort of interesting. I don't do much coaching. I did a lot of clinics for the Major League Baseball Alumni Association when I was living in London and in Singapore. So that's really my, I'll say, touch to modern baseball, as far as younger kids are concerned. Everybody wants to throw hard today, and all the coaches want them to throw hard. And every now and then when I'm, I really want to punish myself, I go on and I look at YouTube things about crazy exercises, and they all talk about, I'm going to make you throw harder.
Yep.
So I don't know who's teaching anybody to have finesse today. One of the folks that came over to London was Randy Jones, Cy Young Award winner. Mm-hmm. By his own admission, the hardest he ever threw was 82 miles an hour. But, he was just a wonderful pitcher because he had great control. Mike Cuellar didn't throw that hard, to bring up a name from the past. Scott McGregor didn't throw that hard. They threw well, but, they weren't going to blow people away. It was about location. It was about changing speeds. And I think today the sequences are almost exclusively determined by statistics. And there's nothing wrong with that because, statistics are going to be, I'm an engineer by training. They are going to be statistically correct more often than not. And that's how the game is being managed today. And, that's how the game has evolved. So guys that don't throw that hard anymore, my concern would be, are you missing young men who are in, the latter stages of high school or in college who might mature by the time they're 23 or 24 or 25 into someone who throws a lot harder than they do today? Some people are late bloomers. I was certainly one of them. But that's the part that I kind of worry. All the scouts show up. They all have radar guns. They all have things now that can tell you how the ball spins. They can do all that kind of stuff. And, that's how they base their judgments today.
Yep, and I have a sort of a wrap-up for you. I know you spent some time with some, various big league clubs, got to see different organizations. What would be some advice that you would give to some minor leaguers today?
Well, when you throw the word today on that, I was thinking about, knowing what some of the questions would be today, I was thinking about the answer to this one. And that is very simply, the situation that is a global pandemic under which we're all existing today.
Yep.
That has taken away baseball for practically all of the minor league organizations. Mm-hmm. And what my advice would be today is, okay, you can't play, but I'll tell you, and I had some of these men as my coaches when I first started playing. These were men that were in the service during World War II and the Korean War. They lost years to service. and they were risking their lives while they were, serving our country.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, lots of people today, lots of professionals today, in healthcare and other fields, they're risking their lives every day to, keep you and me and lots of other people healthy. But my point is, I would say to these young fellows today, boys, you are not going to lose your skills by being away from the game for a year or two. You might get bigger, you might become stronger, and you have time today that you can work on certain things that will help you in the future. The other thing that, because of my involvement, with companies away from baseball, where I've been for the last 35 years, is this is a time that a lot of these young men could be learning new skills. They could be taking courses, online courses. There's a lot of things they could be doing that would enrich their lives and their lives of their families. So I encourage all these young people, you can get yourself stronger. You can work on things that the coaching staff told you, you weren't really all that, you could be better at. But the other thing is personal improvement. So taking online courses, and as much as possible, not worrying about missing the season. The game will be back. It'll be back next year, in its normal circumstances. And, people will get back to doing it. And I think many of them will be surprised that their skills have not eroded. Talented athletes are still talented athletes.
Great points. We certainly appreciate you taking some time out of your day, Paul.
Absolutely. It's been a lot of fun, and, wish everybody back east the best. And, I hope that maybe in another 5 or 6 months, we're watching a regular return to the great game of baseball.
That's what we hope as well. Thanks again.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, Paul. All right, so we just wrapped up our interview with Paul Hartzell, former Orioles pitcher. Definitely a wealth of information, and thanks for getting that guest, Zach.
Yeah, he was great. I would say probably top 5 of who we've had so far. He, provided a lot. Obviously there's a lot that goes on inside clubhouses and inside organizations that the fans don't really get to see. So it's always great to have a player or two on, and hopefully we can get more in the future.
Yep. So we are just about 3, maybe 4 days away from the official trade deadline. So Zach and I want to kind of share our fake trade proposals, one probably most likely to happen, one just likely to happen, and then a third kind of like pie in the sky, least likely to happen. So Zach, lay on me your most likely trade to happen.
Well, we both have a most likely trade to happen. So I'm going to take a guy that has some contract issues that will go on, and I'm sure that the Orioles are hard at work at trying to figure out how to defer the money and all of that stuff that goes on with contracts. But it's Alex Cobb. Alex Cobb is the ace for the Orioles right now. He's pitched so well in the past couple weeks. This is probably the best Alex Cobb the Orioles have seen so far. Obviously much better pitcher with the Rays than he was with the Orioles when he started out. So he's put his name in this trade conversation. He's owed $14 million this year and then $15 million next year. So it's a backloaded contract, I guess you could call it. And the Orioles are going to have to figure out how to make that contract work for another team. So that all being said, I wouldn't really expect a huge return here, but I think that the New York Yankees have a lot to offer as far as a farm system that's not really in the top echelon of farm systems, but more in the bottom 20, you could call it maybe. And the Yankees, I think, have a lot of mid-level prospects that aren't necessarily top 100 guys that could potentially be targets for Alex Cobb. And I specifically picked one out being a guy that the Orioles really could use in their system, and that's Oswald Perez. He's a shortstop, second baseman guy, and this is a guy that I'm very confident the Orioles would like to use. Obviously there's not a ton of depth in the middle infield in the Orioles organization, so getting a guy like Perez immediately helps that out. They got Westberg in the draft, obviously, and Servideo as well, but more and more infield talent is definitely needed. and he's not a top 100 guy. His numbers have been really good across the minors. He's got a little bit of power, but he can run and play defense as well. So this is a guy I'm pretty excited about, and I would hope that the Orioles maybe talk about him in some conversations.
Yeah, I think he's probably one of the more likely guys to go. My guy I picked was Michael Gibbons. I think he's the other likely person to be traded. He's had a few semi-rough outings lately, but overall he's been pretty solid. You know what you're getting when he faces right-handed hitters. He's got that big-time strikeout ability. And I look at a team like the Philadelphia Phillies who need a lot of help. They need a lot of bullpen help especially. And, I think going to the Phillies would make a whole lot of sense for both sides. Not really sure what to expect for the return. I put on my list as a player to be named later. If I were to target a guy, maybe you look at a guy like a Jojo Romero, left-handed pitcher for the Phillies. It's kind of, murky as to what Gibbons would get in a trade package in return. So I would say maybe like a middle of the road, still top 20, top 15 prospect from the Phillies.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And before we get into that more, I do want to say that player to be named later obviously means a lot more than it has in past years. Usually a player to be named later is a very low-level prospect or possibly a very old veteran major leaguer that's not making much money. This year, that all changes. This year, it will be most likely for a lot of the teams are going to be getting player to be named laters in every single trade. So it's probably going to be a better prospect this year, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Jojo Romero is a guy that I'm sure the Orioles would love. Obviously, the Orioles could use as many arms as they can have in the farm system. Obviously there's some top of the line arms like Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall, but there's so much depth that could be had, and Jojo Romero is a great possible piece for the future. So I do like that a lot. I think at this point, Michael Gibbons is almost for sure gone. Mike Elias almost has to go in with the attitude that he's only got 1 year after this year until he hits free agency. He's been pitching almost, I would say, lights out up to this point. The value is really never going to be higher than it is now. So if Mike Elias wants to swing a trade, I could even see a return on the low side being like maybe an Easton Lucas, who was the pitcher we got for Jonathan VR. Maybe that's on the low side. Jojo Romero's on the high side. But I guess we'll see how that goes. I think Gibbons is 100% a done deal.
Yeah, and I did actually just look. Jojo is on the 60-man roster for the Phillies.
Yep.
So there would be no necessity for a player to be named later, which is rare. But I think with a lot of these prospects being promoted lately, I think it's going to be less and less prevalent. So what about a not as likely pick, but maybe a middle of the road trade that you could see happening?
Well, I know you're going to talk about the other catcher, but I want to touch on Chance Sisco, because obviously Chance Sisco has really played himself into these trade conversations. Obviously not a guy who really lived up to his prospect, potential. He was a top 100 guy for many years, and then he never really hit once he got to the majors with the O's. He was deemed the catcher of the future. He really hasn't shown that. But this year he's been getting on base at an unbelievable clip. And it's been far better than past years. He's hitting in the 260s, and he's walking a ton as usual. He has great plate discipline. Obviously, he's still a liability behind the plate, but I think that a team would kind of put that to the side because they need that bat in their lineup. I'm looking at another AL East trade here. I think some people might call me crazy for that, but I'm looking at the Tampa Bay Rays as a possible trade partner. Their two catchers are Mike Zunino and name of right now, but I'll pull them up later. And neither of them are guys. Michael Perez. Yep. Mm-hmm. And neither are guys that have really impressed or are that great of players. Mike Zunino obviously was a power bat for a long time for the Mariners, but he's really not what he used to be. And Perez is not a great catcher either. Hit a home run a couple days ago against the O's, but they could definitely use catcher help is what I'm getting at here. Chance Sisco is not going to be a guy you're going to get a top 100 prospect for either. He's more of a middle of the road to lower guy. But I'm going to pick out the number 15 prospect in their system, being a guy that I've loved for a long time, and that's Moses Gomez. He's an outfielder for the Rays. And the reason I like Gomez is not because he's an outfielder, but it's the sheer raw power this guy has. He comes close to 20 home runs every year in the minors in not a full season every year. This guy's incredible. I mean, he had just massive raw power. He's probably going to end up being a 230, 240 hitter in the majors, but probably put up an 800, maybe 850 OPS at his highest level. But this is a guy I've really loved for a long time in their system, and I think that would be a good fit if the Orioles decide to trade Francisco.
Yeah, I look at another catcher in Pedro Severino. Obviously, we see what he's doing offensively. He's had his misgivings on the defensive side of the ball. But I look at a team maybe like the San Diego Padres, and it's not somebody you would think of who needs offense. But I think their one hole in the lineup is Austin Hedges. And Austin Hedges has always been a defensive-minded catcher first. He's only hitting 160 this year. So he's been struggling pretty mightily. So I think they're, for the most part, they're going to be going after pitching this trade deadline. But I think if they do want to shore up one hole in their lineup, I think they look at Pedro Severino. And they have such a rich and depth-filled farm system that I don't think trading somebody, would be that big of a detriment to them. And I look at a guy like Tucupita Marcano, who is the 13th ranked prospect from the Padres. He's an infielder, doesn't have a lot of power, but he has a long record of getting on base at a high clip. And, long term, you got to ask yourself, is Hanser Alberto that second baseman of the future of the next 6 years? And maybe that guy could be Marcano.
Yeah, I love that. I do think the Orioles will probably target middle infield talent because it's just so depleted in this organization. I still don't look at the Orioles farm system and say that's the guy that's going to be our longtime shortstop, or that's the guy who's going to play longtime second base. There's just no one who really stands out to me. I wasn't a big fan of the Jordan Westberg pick. I do like Servideo a little bit, but both of those guys I don't really see as your franchise shortstop or your franchise second baseman. So I do think the Orioles have work to do there, and it probably will be something they cover in the 2021 draft or maybe in free agency a few years down the line. Carlos Correa, we talked about him before on this podcast as being a great possibility. Javier Baez, Trevor Story. There's lots of good free agents coming up as far as the middle infield goes. And the Orioles will have to sign free agents, but it'd be nice to have a few guys that, we could really count on to be a middle infielder down the road for the Orioles.
Yeah, and then our last pick, I think we kind of have the same idea in mind. So I'll just put it out there. Anthony Santander. No, we're not trading him. We're not going to trade him. I'm just saying, if the perfect offer comes around and you can't say no, the old Godfather, an offer you can't refuse. I look at a team like the Cleveland Indians, who are absolutely desperate for a bat right now. And I think they could really use Santander. They just promoted Tristan McKenzie, who looked great in his first start. And then they have another top 50, top 60 prospect in Nolan Jones. So I look at those two guys that could possibly fetch Santander.
Yeah, we want to reiterate again that this is not a trade we want to happen, or it's probably not going to be a trade that does happen. This is obviously the O's highest ticketed item. Santander's performed extremely well. He's hit the ball so well. He's performed at some would even call an MVP level. We might have to be making those shirts soon, Matt. Santander for MVP. It's
the merch
playing that well. Yeah, it's coming. Santander is putting himself in a position as one of the best players in baseball over these past 30 games it has been now. And he's driven his value up big time. He's only 25. I think that Mike Elias has to almost keep the phone open for any call right now. You can't say no to anything in the position the Orioles are in right now. So Santander would bring back an absolute haul. Tristan McKenzie and Nolan Jones in itself is an absolute haul. I still wouldn't do that deal. Some might call me crazy for that again, but it just doesn't seem like a deal that might pay off in the future. Nolan Jones is a great player. Tristan McKenzie is a great player. But Anthony Santander is a MVP level player as he's playing right now. So not a guy I think the Orioles should trade. But it is interesting because I'm sure the Orioles are getting offers for him.
Yeah, the only reason I bring that up is Tristan McKenzie, obviously a starting pitcher. I think it's been proved time and time again. You need pitching in the playoffs, not only to get to the playoffs, but to win in the playoffs, you need pitching and a lot of it. And I think, guys like Dean Kramer, guys like DL Hall, guys like Grayson Rodriguez are coming. They're on their way. But I think you can't ever, count your chickens before they hatch and say, oh, these are our guys, they're going to be great. It's
Agreed.
not a great way to look at things. And in Nolan Jones, he's a third baseman. Is Rio Ruiz your third baseman of the future? First 2 weeks of the season, yes. Since then, probably not. So you just got to weigh the good with the bad and understand, how does this guy project long term. So I think those just fit more positionally than anything.
Yeah, like you said, it's only a few days now to the trade deadline. It's going to be Monday. I believe it's 4:00, as it is always every year on July 31st. This year it's August 31st. But how many deals do you think the Orioles will make? I'm going to put my number out there, but I want to hear yours first.
I say 2. I say Cobb and Gibbons are gone.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree with that. I'm going to go with 3 because I do think there will be a guy besides Cobb and Gibbons that we really never expected. Kind of like a Richard Blyer trade at the beginning of the year. We never expected that to happen, and it did. So maybe another middle relief guy could be traded. I could see them trading anybody in the bullpen, really. Maybe a Cole Saucer has performed pretty well this year. We're not going to talk about Tanner Scott because we got attacked last time. We wanted to trade Tanner Scott, but definitely someone in that bullpen could be gone. And obviously a guy like Hanser Alberto is probably there too. That
possible.
A name in the conversations.
Possible. Very possible. So yeah, that is our fake trade deadline proposals. If you're listening to this and you have some other ones in mind, feel free. You could comment on the live YouTube chat box, or you could tweet at us. And we will answer it and talk about it on the next pod after the trade deadline passes. So we did want to take a quick look at the past week of Orioles baseball. Obviously, kind of a shortened week. Monday was a regular off day. Last night was not played due to social justice reasons. So we're basically going off of the end of the Red Sox series and the 2 games in Tampa. They went 2-2.
Yeah, it wasn't that impressive. Obviously a couple weeks ago, we were saying this as well, that the Orioles just kind of took a downturn in the past weeks. And that's kind of what it's been again. Not really seeing the situational hitting that the Orioles were having earlier in the year. And then the pitching has obviously gotten a lot worse. Wade LeBlanc got injured, so that will be a extremely high ERA that's now out of the rotation. But
true.
You plug a guy like you plug a guy like Corpez in, it might not be that much different. So it's a struggling ball club right now. I'm really wins here before the trade deadline to possibly up the value of whoever we decide to trade away. But I think this is an important week if the Orioles want to stay in that playoff race. Obviously, I don't think they're going to make it at this point, but it's an important week going forward, and they're going to need to swing the bats.
Yep, and they open up a 3-game series in Buffalo, not Toronto, tonight, playing the Toronto Blue Jays, who really at this point, they have very similar records. Blue Jays are 3-0 against the Orioles this season. So this is probably going to be a pivotal series to decide if one of these 2 teams do get that 7 or 8 seed in the playoffs. So we did want to take a look at the pitching matchup for tonight. All right. So we have John Means going against Hyunjin Ryu. Zach, what do you think?
Well, we saw Ryu against the Orioles a few weeks ago now, and he was pretty lights out through about 5 innings. And you can see that 319, 33 Ks. He's been really, really good. And, he kind of struggled to start the season for the Blue Jays, but now he's kind of finding himself a little bit, and he's showing why they signed him that massive deal in the offseason. So, the Orioles, I think, do hit left-handers pretty well. They have done a little bit better off them from as far as the eye test goes. And John Means, he's a guy that really needs a good start tonight. More than anybody in the world needs a good start. He struggled so bad. I do want to talk about Brandon Hyde for a second. I think Brandon Hyde needs to give a much bigger leash on John Means. It's been ridiculous, frankly, what Brandon Hyde has been doing to John Means. He takes him out for 2 innings. He doesn't let him find his stuff. It's honestly just terrible. I mean, I know he's been out a while. He's been injured. He was on the bereavement list. But there's no other way to put it. It's been terrible. You've got to let him figure some things out. It's clearly not working for him. If you keep him out of the mound for 4 innings, it doesn't matter if he gives up 5 runs if he's getting back the stuff that he had last year. His changeup isn't working. It's hanging in the middle of the zone. His fastball's way upstairs. It's not a good start for John Means, but I think tonight is the night you can turn it around.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, the changeup not working like it has been, compared to last season. Very small sample size, just, hasn't really looked great with the control at times.
Yeah.
So, this is going to be a big start for him. Hopefully he's up to the task. Definitely wish him well. We know he's a good pitcher. I don't think that's in question. I think it's just one of those oddities to start the season. He's been dealing with a lot with his dad. Shortened season, weird spring training. So hopefully he can right the ship. All right.
Yeah, and we both predicted a little bit of regression earlier in these podcast episodes. We both said it's a probable thing that he will regress a little bit. This is not regression. This is not even being the same pitcher. This is a 10.13 ERA. That is not what John Means is. He'll bring that down a lot if Brandon High will let him get innings. That's a whole different a whole different thing. But John Means will get it down, and he'll return to at least maybe close to the form of what he was in 2019.
And then we have the starting lineups for tonight's game. Zach, if you want to walk us through that.
Yeah, so for Toronto, they've got Kevin Biggio leading off, Randall Grichuk in the 2-hole, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. in the 3-hole, and Teoscar Hernandez cleaning up, Lourdes Gurriel Jr. right behind him, Rowdy Tellez, Travis Shaw, Danny Jansen, and Joe Panik rounding it out. They've got Hanser Alberto leading off with Santander batting second. Jose Iglesias makes his return. He's DHing tonight, batting third. Renato Nunez bats fourth, and Pedro Severino will be in the 5-hole, also making his return. Ryan Mountcastle batting sixth, Pat Valaika seventh, Velasquez eighth, and the hot-hitting Cedric Mullins is ninth.
Yeah, you mentioned it. Cedric Mullins hitting 280, which is much better than we saw from him last year, and he's had some nice games where he's gotten 3-4 hits, getting on a base as well to make some steals. I've been really impressed with Mountcastle so far. He's been no home runs so far, but he's been showing a lot of plate discipline, drawing walks. So that's really, really encouraging, really good to see for the future. For the Blue Jays, Randall Grichuk, Orioles killer. They're going to put him in that 2-hole so he gets as many at-bats as he can. I see that. I see what you're doing.
Matt, I want to bring up Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Just to talk about him a second here. Obviously hailed as this incredible prospect, going to be better than his dad. What have you kind of seen from him? Why do you think he's struggling and only has 4 home runs to this point?
Yeah, I mean, he has. There have been questions about keeping up in shape. There have been questions about plate discipline as well. He's not the same player that we saw tear through the minor leagues. I mean, when you saw this guy in the minor leagues putting up the numbers that he did, hitting 500-foot bombs, you thought all the hype was going to be true. I'm not going to call it, I'm not going to call his career over by any means. I think he's going to find his stride eventually. I think it would be beneficial if he was a full-time DH so he could just focus on hitting.
Yeah, his defense certainly does him no favors. Obviously one of the worst parts about him. But yeah, I think you're right in that assessment. I think his swing looks a little long personally. He's just kind of behind a lot. He's been behind the fastball specifically, and he's striking out a lot. And it's definitely not the guy, like you said, that tore through the minors. Maybe the Blue Jays will put him on a little bit of a plan to lose some weight in the offseason because that could be an issue for him being so slow around the bases and obviously having slow hands right now. But Vladdy needs to figure something out. And, maybe he'll end up being the star we once saw him becoming. But I don't really know at this point. It hasn't been that impressive this year.
Yeah, he reminds me a lot of like Miguel Sano, where there was a lot of hype. And, Sano has had his difficulties on and off the field. I hope that Vladdy's career trajectory is the same. I hope that he turns the ship. Obviously, selfishly for an Orioles fan, I don't want him to be, the next A-Rod or anything. But, I think he still has a lot of time to right things.
Yeah, definitely. He's really young. He's only in his early 20s right now, so he has a lot of time to figure stuff out. But I'm just kind of surprised to see that he has been struggling. And I know a lot of Toronto fans are really frustrated with him because they expect much more. But he's not doing terrible. I mean, he's better. He's better than he could be. The worst possible Vladdy could be. So, I mean, maybe he figures it out here soon.
Anything else before we wrap it up, Zach?
No, but we'll definitely keep an eye on that trade deadline. Have a show out next Friday, breaking down all the moves.
Can't wait. I'm looking forward to it. Should be pretty exciting. So as always, we appreciate you tuning into our show. If you are watching this, you can listen to us on Spotify, on iTunes, anywhere you get your podcasts. If you are listening to this, we are on YouTube. We live stream every Friday. If you want to go back in some of our archives, we did a live stream for the draft. We did an interview with Dan Duquette. We've had several episodes with different people involved with the Orioles. We had Melanie Newman on. We had Jennifer Grandal on. So appreciate it as always, and we will talk to you guys next week.